Hey, everybody. Okay, welcome back to Home But Not Alone. Today, we're going to talk about idolatry. Okay, not adultery, idolatry. So, like making idols out of something. I just thought maybe I said it funny. It kind of sounded like the wrong thing. Okay, we're talking about it in a way that maybe most of us have never considered. So, not like the golden calf or like your job or your money, but we're talking about making an idol out of the family and what that means and how to not to. Hey, Tim.
Hey, Sarah. All right. You said you had a story. I want to hear it. I want to hear what's going on.
So this weekend, we went out in the woods for a family hike. It was a real nice hike. And I was taking some pictures of the kids, walking along, and it was beautiful. The leaves are changing colors, right? Oh, it's beautiful. I got to take some pictures so I can share with our friends on Facebook and everything. And then the sounds, we walked by, it was really cool. There was the stream, it was coming out from like underground. And it was trickling over the rocks and it sounded really cool. So I took a little video so we could share the sounds. But also, that smell? Like it smells like fall and like you're out in the wild in the woods and it's like the fresh air, it smells so good. And so I said to my husband, like, wouldn't it be cool if we could share smells digitally too? Like, why are we limited to only having to share the things that we see and the things that we hear? Like, I was like, I could share these pictures and these videos on Facebook, but nobody's going to know how amazing this day
Wow.
My husband did not appreciate that. He doesn't think that would be cool.
Well, I mean, just think about it this way. People misuse and abuse technology in regards to the human body in so many ways. They would start doing that with smells as well. Yeah,
Yeah, but
you open up an inappropriate Snapchat at your job, that's problematic. You open an inappropriate smell chat, everybody's gonna know. and that's gonna
but like, just think about it. Like, so the technology that allows us to send what we see and what we hear, how come there's not a technology that allows us to send the other senses?
well, because I watched a math comedy video recently. And yes, that's a thing. This guy's a former math teacher turned comedian. Yeah. And he does really nerdy humor. And he did a whole thing on how every picture, every digital picture is just like an Excel spreadsheet. And it's true. He proved it in front of us, or in front on the video at the conference he was doing. And so maybe it's because there is no spreadsheet way of doing.
I'm Googling it.
You're
Can you
Googling.
send smells digitally? I'm
No,
typing it into Google.
don't waste. All right, this is. Let's talk about idolatry and not digital smells.
Come on.
I've never been so excited to move on to the topic of idolatry before. Okay, this is okay. So now you mentioned some of
Okay,
this before.
idolatry. Hang on. This
Yes,
is a serious topic.
yes, you
All right.
mentioned some of this before. Does that work ever? Be okay? Now we're serious. That's I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm
doesn't
ready. Come
works
on.
for you. It doesn't work for
Bring
me.
it on.
No, okay. So you mentioned some of this before, but like because of whether it's because of the examples given in the Old Testament or like our overexposure to a Charlton Heston movie, like the Ten Commandments, um, most people do exactly what you were talking about earlier when they think about idolatry. They're like, well, it's like the golden calf. And they're like, I don't kneel before a physical idol, a golden calf, a statue of something that isn't divine, like, or, that isn't a saint or whatever it is, like I don't kneel before any of these things. I don't believe that a material object is God. Therefore, idolatry is basically a thing of the pagan past. And the thing is that for the modern person, most sins of idolatry, they vary from everything from um, worshiping the planet, which happens all the
Oh, yeah.
time, that when people put the planet before human lives, which happens constantly, unfortunately, in our modern culture, to worshiping ourselves, which we often do when it comes to like, well, I need more social media followers, or I posted something just with the intention of, I bet this will get me more likes. And it's like, yeah, there's there's a degree of idolatry there. And so,
Right.
it is possible to make an idol out of anything. And it's a grave and serious thing to do. This is one reason why I've noticed that Protestants struggle so much with both. I've noticed that Protestants seem to struggle mostly with Marian dogmas and the teachings on the Eucharist. And I actually told a Protestant pastor one time, I said, here's the thing. If, as a Catholic, I'm wrong, I'm not, but if, as a Catholic, I'm wrong about the Eucharist, then that makes me an idolater. And that is a very grave and serious thing. So if I was not Catholic, and if any one of you who are watching or listening to this is not Catholic, if you're Protestant specifically, I completely understand why there is that disconnect. And I've heard a lot of people who are converts to Catholicism from a Protestant Protestant faith, that they've said that is often, for a lot of Protestants who become Catholic, those two things are the most difficult to overcome, because it is challenging to understand why our elevation of Mary is not idolatry. It's not, but you have to understand the context, the accuracy of the teaching. And it's nice to also know that in the early part of the church, I'm trying to remember exactly when it was, there was a heresy where a group of people were offering the sacrifice of the Mass to Mary, to which the Catholic Church said, stop it. That is a heresy. Do not do it. So we actually condemned Marian worship very early in Christianity.
Oh, that question still comes up, though. Why do you worship Mary? Like, we don't.
Yes.
We see why that would be a problem if you did, but you have to understand, like, what is this honor that we give to her? It's not making her an idol.
And anyway, so just in all of these things, I bring this. I do write down what the heresy is. It's
look at it.
Collyridianism. It's called the Collyridians. The heresy was then called Collyridianism, because they worshipped Mary as a goddess, and they offered the sacrifice of the Mass to her, which is a no-go, and that was in the 300s. So anyway, as I mentioned, you can make an idol out of anything. It's serious, and we need to be aware of what is actually idolatry and all these things. And we need to take it seriously and work to not idolize things. And even the family can be made into an idol. And so, Sarah, what do you?
Jesus talks to us about this in the gospel, about making the family an idol. If you look in there, so first of all, Luke chapter 10, verse 27, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so that tells us the order in which we need to put things. I mean, this is the first commandment. You should love I am the Lord your God. You should not put other gods before me. Okay, so God has to come first before everything. And then later on in the gospel, Luke chapter 14, verse 26, Jesus says something that really disturbs a lot of us. It can come off really harsh, and it's hard to understand. He says, whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. And so that word hate kind of catches us like, whoa, you're telling me to hate my family. And I heard something recently about the translation of this word hate. Like, obviously, God is not telling us to actually literally hate these things, because in that list is included even your life itself. But just up here in the verse I read before, it says, love your neighbor as yourself. So clearly, you're supposed to have a certain type of love for yourself. But what it means in terms of hate, that word translates into the meaning of loving these things less, like putting them second, and God comes first. Okay, so it's saying whoever comes to me and hasn't put your father and your mother second to me, hasn't put your wife and children second to me, your brothers and sisters, and even your own life second to me, God, this is Jesus speaking, cannot be my disciple. So we have to love God more than anything and anyone in the world, even our family, our parents, our siblings, our spouses, our children sort of just love the sweet little snuggly babies so much. You have to love God more.
Well,
And
and let me
go ahead.
throw in there real quick in the Jesus would never say to actually hate father and mother, because by doing so, he would be telling you to break a commandment.
Right,
And he does not do that. And if
right.
anything, the life of Jesus shows us how much we must honor our mother and father.
Yeah.
So the way he lived it and everything he did. But yeah, that, and just a side note on the strength, soul, heart, and loving Jesus, loving God with all that. Um, I heard, I think it was from Brant Petrie, who's a Catholic scholar, and he's really an expert on the early church and the first century Judaism. And he said that in that culture at that time, they would have understood strength to be like material strength. So
Oh,
your money, your means, all of that. So not just, oh, well, physically, I'm going to go punch a heretic or something, or I'm going to go fight, and I'm going to get and go move chairs at church, which requires strength. I don't know, something like that. Um,
do
that
some real powerful lunges when you're genuflecting, like in your way into the
Yes,
pew.
just some intense genuflecting, like you go down so hard that your knee goes through the tile floor or whatever it is. Um, but no, but to use to that they would have understood strength as material strength in that
Okay,
way.
all right,
So anyway,
sure.
go ahead. I
Okay,
interrupted.
so no, that's okay. That's a really good point. So here's the good news, though. When we love God first, then we're able to love all these other people more, like more than we could have if we put them above God. So the more you love God and enter into God's love, that virtue of charity towards God, increases our capacity to have more charity towards our neighbor, towards our family. And so that's what Christ requires of us. And if we want to love our family more, like if you want to love your spouse more or your children more, don't love them more by putting them above God. Love them more by loving God more, so you can grow in capacity to love them more. So that's like the good news here about putting things in the right order, because you got God in your family, and as they move up, they'll move up together. So here's an interesting thing. We all have broken relationships in our lives. Okay, so we receive love from all, the people in our family, but most of all, we receive love from God. And love from God is perfect, it's unconditional, it is infinite. But love from any human, no matter how good they are, any human in our life, it's not going to be as perfect. Yeah, it's going to be a lot smaller compared to God's love. And so when we expect, when we make an idol of our family and we expect these people to provide for all the love that we need in our lives, right? And we expect these people to fulfill us. Well, these people in our lives are fallen humans just like we are. We know that we are not perfect in loving others, and these people in our lives are not perfect in loving us in return.
No.
But if we expect them to be, and we put them, as the highest object of our love, then when they inevitably fail us and hurt us in some way, then our lives can be shattered. But if we focus on, God as the ultimate object of our love, and receiving his unconditional love, and knowing only that, only by being loved by him will we be fulfilled, and can we have that perfectly fulfilling relationship and enter into that love, then, when we have these broken relationships in our family, whoever it might be in your, so you all got that. Think about that broken relationship that you have in your family. You all have one. If we love God first and we expect to be fulfilled by God, then we're able to love our family members better through these broken relationships, because we know that our fulfillment does not come from being loved
Yeah.
perfectly by them. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think it makes perfect sense. I think there are a lot of things that a lot of times we know intellectually, like, oh, okay, well, my value comes from God. My identity comes from God. Like maybe we've been taught this, or we just kind of instinctually understand it. Um, but then whether it be, in this case, we're talking about family, whether it be a familial relationship or a friendship, or whether it be a job, or especially this happens a lot with kids with grades and sports and such, that we start to then place our value on these fragile things that will fail at some point, and we essentially then make them God. And we
Right.
sit there and say we depend on this as if it was God, and they become, that thing or person becomes our own personal God. And that is not only bad and sinful and problematic and will hurt us, but it's completely unfair to whoever we're doing that to, or
Yeah.
whatever we're doing that
Right.
to, because no one can do that. So yeah, makes perfect sense to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So basically, it comes down to anything we love more than God is an idol, is a false God, breaks that first commandment,
Yeah.
even if it's our family that we're loving more than God. And that will
Yeah.
never, worshiping an idol, making an idol out of our family, making an idol out of anything will never fulfill our lives. So I feel like what we've been talking about is like very theoretical, like we're throwing out all these ideas. Can we talk about like maybe some concrete examples of what it might mean or what it might look like, different ways that we are tempted to make an idol of the family?
Yes, absolutely. So I have some examples written down here. The first one, and I've seen this a lot, is worshiping family size.
Oh,
Yeah, and I know that this is difficult for a lot of us because of either, you know, being married later in life, or being married earlier in life, or being single, or longing to be married, longing to have kids, fertility issues, trying to avoid pregnancy and not being successful with that. So there
yeah.
are any number of ways that this can be a very personal and difficult topic. But I think what we do often, and I was talking with a very smart friend of mine about this earlier, is we'll sit there and do things like, oh, look at that family with 8 kids, that Catholic family of 8 kids. They're so Catholic. And we're like, we have no idea what's going on in their hearts
No,
or their
right.
home. Like, that might not be the assumption. Or, you know, I think a lot of people have done this once or twice, where they sit there and go, oh, a couple only has X number of
Right.
kids.
One kid.
Yeah, you think they're doing something they shouldn't be doing to limit their family size. Like, there's
Meanwhile,
a
you don't know that they tried for 14 years to have that one kid, and they're
yeah,
open to the life and the
yeah,
family God gave them. This is a good one.
yes,
And this
and,
is one, particularly for me. So I've talked about this on the blog that, we're going through some fertility treatment and we're struggling with that right now. But one of the things that I've learned, we always wanted that big family, that ideal big Catholic family. But one of the things I'm learning right now is to trust God more in the family that He has planned for us. And then to enter into loving the family that I have right in front of me, loving my husband more, loving my children more, and not like placing my hope in a certain number of kids. So yeah, I
yeah,
can definitely see that temptation to worship the family size
yeah,
rather than, loving God's plan for the family that He's giving you.
yeah. Another example is seeing sacramental marriage as fulfilling your wants or desires. It drives me
It's a tough
nuts
one.
when I see somebody, saying, "Oh, well, we're getting divorced. We just don't make each other happy anymore." And to which, part of my first thought on that is, do you think marriage is about you being happy?
Right.
Because hopefully you're happy within marriage. Like, I don't think marriage should be just all about people are just suffering and miserable all the time. If that's happening, something's wrong. But a lot of people say, oh no, now we're just better off as friends, we're not as happy anymore as we used to be with this, that, or another thing. And I think about that and I'm like, no, marriage is supposed to be a sanctifying thing. It's supposed to be about self-giving. Now, hopefully, it's two people giving of themselves.
Right.
And sometimes I'm very well aware that it is not always, and that makes it so much more difficult.
Right.
But the idea of, oh, well, this person doesn't make me happy, or I want them to just make me happy and make my marriage about me. And I think, yeah, we have a right, I think, to say, well, I want my spouse to treat me well. I want them to love
Oh
me. I
yeah.
want them to care for me. 100%. We don't have a right to then say my spouse should be making me happy all the time. Like, no, that is elevating someone, like I said before. Then
Yeah.
you're elevating them to a godlike status, and they are not God. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Another one, and this can be similar to family size, but not always. Viewing other families as being perfect or being the ideal, with the exception of, say, the Holy Family. Um, it's really hard to beat that family. But
Yeah, right.
um, but I know I've done this where I'll sit there and I'll say, "Oh man, I wish that I was the dad who was able to get up at 5 a.m. and go for a run and be in great shape and then be at 6 a.m. mass every single morning, and then I'm home just in time to get my kids out of bed, and then but in reality, I'm like, what do you mean I have to get up before 9 a.m.? That's not, and some of it is
Or I
just,
wish my family was the one whose kids sit still at mass.
yeah, there are occasionally families like
My kids
that,
do not do
and
that.
I'm thinking, what are you guys doing right? Well, on
Right.
one hand, maybe they're doing something right, and on the other hand, maybe their kids are scared of them, and their kids are
Um,
actually afraid of like, I must behave. Also, children have different temperaments.
different temperaments.
So if they were raising our children, they would not be the one with children sitting
That's
still.
right.
So
Yep.
we cannot view other families as being perfect or the ideal, because every
Right.
family has their struggles, their flaws, their whatever it may be.
Yes.
Another one, and I mentioned this before a little bit, but I think I did, but posting like family pictures on social media, not as a way of sharing, but as a way of getting attention.
Mm.
There's
Well,
nothing
oh
wrong.
yeah. So you had talked about like
Yeah.
posting your own pictures just to kind of get attention, but
Yeah.
this is even worse because then not only are you making the family an idol, you're using your family for your own selfish purposes here.
Yeah. And I think intent has a lot to do with this. It's not wrong to make an Instagram account just for your baby. I don't know why people do it. If one of you who is watching or listening has done that, please let me know why, because no one's ever told me why. I'm like, it
Maybe
seems
they have the cutest baby in the world and they
that
just
could be it.
can't help but let everybody see that cute baby.
That could be it. But we just have to be careful not to share things for the sake of saying, look at me, look at me, look at me.
Right.
That is making an idol out of the family. It's making an idol out of individual family members and out of the self.
Yeah.
um, we have just a few more real quick. Not
You
living the
got
faith.
time. Yeah.
Okay, not living the faith publicly. Like things like praying in a restaurant for fear of being judged.
Okay.
I know that I still hear from people where they're like, "Oh, that's really hard for me." I
Okay.
love when I hear,
So, like, you
uh,
want your family to look a certain way.
yes,
So, you don't want to
yes,
be like that weird family at the restaurant that all makes those crazy hand symbols, sign of the cross,
yes,
and says those crazy chant prayers. Okay. All right.
yes. Yes. Thank you for taking my thoughts and putting them into words that make
Oh,
sense.
sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, no. You did that.
I'm
I
just trying to
needed that.
understand.
That makes a lot. That you made me make sense. So yeah. But we need, in that case, we are making an idol out of the family, not in the way of being like, look at this religious family or look at how religious we are, but in the opposite of being
Right.
like, I don't want people to think we're odd. I want
Right.
people to think we fit in, we belong, we're normal, we're not unusual. And I don't want them to think anything else. In that case, we're making an idol out of the family, in that the perception that other people have of our family, people we may never see again, their perceptions of our family is more important than actually thanking God for the
Right.
delicious chicken fingers you're about to eat. Okay,
Yeah.
like that's, or whatever you order. I don't know what
Or
everybody
whatever
else.
aspect of living out the faith. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's one example that popped into my head in that way. But
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. Um, Another one, unwilling to admit faults, being unwilling to admit faults to your children.
Okay.
Um, because in that case, you're not making an idol necessarily out of the whole family,
Okay.
but you're making an idol out of yourself. And I think it can be really easy to
That's
fall into
good.
the habit of being like, I'm the parent, I'm in charge. And as the in charge authority, I don't have to apologize when I make mistakes, or to just forget to apologize when we make mistakes, to forget to say, yeah, I was wrong there. Um, I raised my voice recently, and one of my children looked at me and said, you need to say sorry for yelling. And I thought, you're not wrong.
Oh
Um,
man.
but I just didn't expect to be called out on it. So, and it
By
was
your kids. That's
it
awesome.
it was
Yeah,
actually a really good reminder, and I was like, yeah, that was a mistake. That was me, not me at my best.
right.
And since we're not always at our best, we have to be willing to admit that, even no matter what form that comes in.
Right.
Now,
Well, this
yeah,
makes me think
yeah,
of my grandmother always tells me these stories about dinner tables, their dinner table in their house growing up, and children were supposed to be seen and not heard. And so it's almost a mentality of, putting yourself as parents, your dignity like above the dignity of your children, like ignoring the dignity of your children. And that is, making an idol, maybe not like you said of the entire family, but of the concept of parenthood, that being a parent makes you a god over these children. And that's very, demeaning to the children, and not respecting their dignity. So yeah, we gotta say sorry.
yeah. I remember I was looking over some old stuff recently, and I remember there was about a year and a half ago, I was at mass with both my kids by myself. My wife, who's a nurse, was working, and they don't sit still. They're crazy. And sometimes you're like, oh no, the old man's gonna be mad. Well, there was this one usher, and he's just the nicest man in the world. And I said something about, there are people out there who think that children should be seen and not heard. And he looks at me and he says, have they met children? Children are always heard. They're always that's what they're supposed to
Yes.
do. God
Right.
made them that way. And I was like, okay, I like this guy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was something
He gets
along
it.
those lines, but he gets it. And he was
Yeah,
clearly, based on what he and I've talked about over the last couple of years, he was very involved as a father,
that's good.
which was not as common when he was younger
Right.
for
Yeah.
fathers to be as involved. But he clearly was somewhat involved, or involved enough to be aware of, like, yeah, no, I was there. That's what I dealt with. So yeah. And I think that's another thing is I mentioned before, living the faith publicly. We go to mass and we're like, oh, my kids aren't behaving. And I'm worried that other people are going to be mad that my kid, or they're going to say things to me. Well, if somebody says something to you about that and you're doing your best, that person's wrong, not you. So don't try
Right.
and reshape the situation to fit the person who's wrong. So, um,
Oh, I
yeah,
think we talked about this before.
I'm sure we have. I have very strong opinions on this. And
I
so
feel
I've
like
had,
I always text you when I come out of mass just to get that reassurance when my kids are terrible.
well, and I've had people respond to me on social media to say things like, well, you can't just let them run wild. There's another side to this. And I'm like, I never said you just let them get away with murder.
No,
Like
no,
that's
right,
not the same thing as acknowledging age appropriate behavior. Those are
right.
two very different things. And people are like, well, there's just a second side to this. I'm like, no, there's not. That's a completely different topic. Do not lump
You
in
tell my
parents.
toddler there's another side to this,
Yeah,
okay?
exactly. Yeah, go
All
ahead.
right. So if you want to
Anyway.
love your family more,
Yeah.
just we invite you to take some time and really examine your heart, to discern whether you're loving God most, okay? Or if you're letting your love of your family get in the way of loving God, okay? So if you are treating your family as an idol, make it a point to start working on putting God back in first place in your life so that He can give you the grace to love your family more.
All right. Well, hey, we just want to thank everybody for watching and listening today. Um,
Go
and we
Google
just
smell-o-vision.
and we want to just, if you could subscribe, please. No, if you could subscribe either to the audio podcast or the YouTube channel, leave us a little like or a comment. That helps. We appreciate it. Sarah, where can people find you?
ToJesusSincerely.com and on social media at ToJesusSincerely.
And you can find me at chasedlove.org or on Facebook and Instagram at The Chaste Love. Now, replace all the cups, adult and child, all the cups in your house with exactly the same cup. So you only have one size, one shape, and one color of cup. Sure, you'll end up drinking alcohol out of a kid's cup, but at least no one will be bugging you about, well, I want the only orange cup. Never have to deal with that again. And remember, you're never alone.